Hi, and welcome back to the Watchman's Whole Word Bible Study with me, Donovan. And we are in the book of Genesis, book of beginnings, and we just saw the beginning of circumcision, where Abraham, due to his sinful nature that he's allowed into his house with his wife Sarah, and the way they're using her servant Hagar to is a kind of perverse sexual situation that they've gotten themselves into, and it brings this child into the world, Ishmael, who God did not mean to come into the world. It wasn't through the will of God, it was through the will of Abraham and Sarah's flesh. And now Ishmael is there, so God comes and he wants to provide a symbol of how we are to separate ourselves from the world, from, in Abraham's case, from the sins of the flesh. So he has Abraham circumcise his foreskin and the foreskin of everyone who lives in his home, and that's going to be a covenant that God keeps with Abraham's descendants, and that it is kept to this very day with the Jews. And many of us have adopted this covenant, though the covenant of non-Jews who are not under the law but are under the covenant of grace doesn't require circumcision. It requires circumcision of the heart and to walk rightly in the presence of God. So we saw that in chapter 18, and the promise of the coming of Isaac through Sarah, who is 90 years old and is well beyond menopause. So it's a miracle that she is able to conceive and bear Isaac and bring him into the world, just as God promised some 25 years earlier to Abraham, who over time began not to believe it and began to conflagrate God's word with all these other things, like maybe he means it's Ishmael, that kind of thing. And he was wrong about all that. God was true to his word. He meant to bring children into the world and build a nation, not through anyone besides Abraham and his true wife, Sarah, and not through any other woman that Abraham insisted on being with. So now we're coming to the last mention in chapter 19 of Lot. After God stops by and talks to Abraham, he now is going up to investigate what he's heard, the outcry that he's heard coming from Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot, we know, lives in Sodom. And we know a few things about Lot. If we go back to when Abram was called, we see that his father's name is Terah, and they live in the city of Ur. And Ur is a polygamist and a polytheist city. They have multiple marriage, they have plural wives, and they also have multiple gods. Now, how do we know that they have multiple gods? You could probably look that up and find that out if you looked in just on the internet. But you can see it in the book of Joshua, verse 24:2 reads, Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many." So that is the biblical record. So Terah has more than one wife. That's why Abraham and Sarah are siblings and spouses. And he has 3 sons among his children. Abram, who was Abraham, being the oldest. And then we have Nahor, and he had his youngest son is Haran. Haran at some point dies. And Haran, before he died, he had 3 children. Lot, his son, Milcah, his daughter, and Ishkah, who I don't know if that's a daughter or a son, but he has those 3 children. So that is Haran, Lot's father, passes away. And I think this brings Lot and Abram really close together. I think that Abram kind of becomes a father figure to Lot. And I also think that Lot is drawn to Abram because, first of all, Abram is a very strong man. He's a strong-willed person. He's got a strong personality. People are drawn to Lot. When there's a problem, go to Lot. When there's a fight, you want Abram. So I think that's why Lot is drawn to Abram, because he's a young person, he's lost his father, and Abram is a strong father-type figure. And I think that Abram is drawn to Lot because Abram has no children of his own, and he kind of has all of these fatherly qualities, this desire to be a father, and here's Lot, who's looking for all that. So God brings these two people together. And here's another thing. Abram and Lot are monotheist in a polytheist society. Abram is called by God because he worships one God. And I believe that influences Lot, and Lot adopts Abram's his faith and believes in just God alone. Now, the people of Ur, they weren't like the people, they weren't modern like we are. They didn't deny the existence of God. We're only about 700 years from the flood of Noah. They know that there's a God, and they know that it's an interventionist God. But what they've begun to do is they've begun to worship the heavens. They've begun to worship things in nature, and they've begun to just build idols. Now they worship. They stop worshiping what God has. They stop worshiping God. They stop worshiping what God has made, and they begin to start worshiping things that they've made. But they still know that God is there, and they still believe in God, and that hasn't changed a whole lot. They've added things to God and put God way down the list. And have we improved on that? Have we changed at all? Ur is kind of like today, all the people, all the Christians who believe in God, but they also believe in the zodiac and horoscopes, who believe in karma, and the people who say things like what goes around comes around. Christians who adhere to principles from Eastern paganism like yoga and feng shui. And how many Christians do you know who are into this whole positive thinking movement that you see all over Facebook with the memes? And I know a lot of Christians who believe in speaking it into existence, speak it and be it. That whole movement, that's paganism. That's adding doctrines to God. That's a form of self-worship. And the entire movement of prosperity gospel, all of it, all of those things, including prosperity gospel, are works of man, and adding things that are not divine and including them in your worship of God. So you have God, and then you have a bunch of carven, graven images that fill your house, and when your wife won't get pregnant, you pray to God, and then you burn an incense or a candle to your little pagan god of fertility, or you change around rearrange the furniture in your house, your feng shui. You paint your front door red. You try to do things to improve your energy. You start meditating and following deep breathing exercises and this kind of thing. The fitness trend in America, every year America gets more and more fat, more and more people die of obesity related diseases, but the fitness industry runs rampant with Eastern doctrines, diets and exercise and all these kind of things that come right out of pagan religions in places like Korea and China. So that is Ur, and that is how we know about Ur and the family of Terah. So and Abraham and Lot are different than them, and they are righteous, and that's why God calls these two men out. Now, Abram, oftentimes you can't tell that he's righteous because he lives a lot like the people who he's surrounded by. And Lot is also, it's difficult to tell that he's righteous. But we know that he's righteous because 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7, Peter tells us, And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and he heard. That's Peter talking about Lot's condition in Sodom. So let's talk a little bit quickly about how Lot got to Sodom. Abram is called by God out of Ur, and he goes, and he ends up in the promised land. What we know of is the promised land, and it is filled at this time with Canaanites. Soon after he gets there, a famine strikes, and that pushes Abram, without the will of God, to go to Egypt seeking food. He gets there and bad things happen. His wife gets snatched. She gets put into Pharaoh's harem. But Abram doesn't take any of these as a warning sign. He and his nephew Lot hang out in Egypt with their families, and they enjoy Egypt. It's a cosmopolitan city. It's got food. It's got entertainment. It's got worldly pleasures. And they stay there for some time because they grow rich. They acquire servants. They acquire goods. They acquire cattle. They acquire money in Egypt. And finally, what happens is God intervenes. He afflicts Pharaoh's household, and we're going to see these things played out again in Exodus with the entire nation of Israel. He plagues Pharaoh's household because of Sarah, who Abraham is doing absolutely nothing for or about, and Pharaoh kicks Abraham and Lot and their whole entourage. He kicks them out, and they end up going back to the land of the Canaanites, to precisely the same place that Abraham was in when the famine first struck. So they go out, but now they have a lot of goods. And you wonder why these two righteous men don't know why they're not in the will of God? Well, because they're deceived by the money. Whenever we do anything that makes us money, we forget the Lord. No one who makes money considers how they made money to be evil, right? The money is its own justification. And so Abram and Lot, they can't see what the evil that they exposed themselves to while they were in Egypt. And one of those evils is that Lot has become addicted, and Lot and his wife have become kind of addicted to this worldly cosmopolitan lifestyle that they saw in Egypt. So they get kicked out of Egypt, and they're back in Canaan. But now they've become so wealthy, Lot's wealth approaches Abraham's wealth. And they become so wealthy that they can't stay together anymore. So Abraham and their little groups are fighting over grazing land and that kind of thing. So Abram approaches Lot. He says, we can't stay together. You decide where you want to live. And whichever way you go, I'll go the opposite way, and I'll take my people and my goods. We have to separate and part ourselves because we're too rich to stay together. And it's causing a conflict. So Lot, he looks and he starts looking for a place that's like Egypt. He wants to live someplace that's as close to Egypt as he can be without being in Egypt. And the place that he finds is Sodom. And he moves into Sodom. Abraham does something different. Abraham continues to live in tents and wander the land because God commands him to walk to and fro throughout the land and says, I'm going to give you all this land. You need to go and survey it. But Lot doesn't get that command. So Lot moves into Sodom, and he lives in a house within the gates of the city. And it's an evil, wicked city. And Abraham never makes a connection that it's because of his sin of getting out of the will of God and going up to Egypt that these terrible things have happened. And now Lot is in this place where he's afflicted because Lot is that Christian who believes in God but is trying to live in the world and have God. And it's not working for him. And we're going to see how terribly bad it's going for him in chapter 19. So with that foundation underneath our belts, let's get into the text of chapter 19. Verse 1. remember, Jesus came down with two angels. I'm not sure where Jesus went, but he doesn't go into the city of Sodom with the two angels. Just the two angels enter into Sodom. So that's where we are in verse 1. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. So in ancient times, in this culture, this is how prestigious Lot has gotten. First of all, because he's rich, and two, because Abram saved the city of Sodom when they got into a war, and Sodom lost. Abram came in and fought, and he won, and he freed all of the captured people and all of the booty that the king of Sodom's enemies had captured. And so that's gotten Lot favorable treatment from the rulers in Sodom. They remember Lot for the sake of Abraham. And he sits at the gate. In ancient times, sitting at the gate means that you sit in government. That's where people come in and do trade. That's where contracts are written up. That's where people come and they have their disputes heard. This is where the rulers come. You know, in Europe, they would have a palace, but they don't do that here. The king and the king's court, they hold court at the gate of the city. So Lot sits at the gate. He sits in judgment, and which is rare because he's a foreigner, but he's a rich foreigner whose relatives have done a great favor for the king of Sodom. So that's the reason why he is made a judge. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we'll spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now, I think that he might suspect that there's something different about these two men. But I also think that Lot has probably gotten to a point where he's seen so much evil in the city of Sodom that they do to strangers who come through, that I think that he's probably been doing this, trying to warn strangers off of Sodom. I think he's been trying to warn strangers off of Sodom and get them to go somewhere else because he knows what type of men fill the city of Sodom. So he gets these two guys to come in. Verse 4, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people, to the last man surrounded the house." So the whole town, the whole city of Sodom comes out. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." They want to know them. That means that they want to rape these men. Lot went out to the men at the entrance and shut the door after him. So he steps out and closes the door behind him and says, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please." Now that's remarkable. That's very remarkable, and I can't explain it. It goes way beyond the hospitality that is demonstrated in this culture. He says, "Don't harm the 2 strangers who I really don't know at all." I mean, they could be violent men, as far as I know. They could be running from something, as far as I know. I don't know, but rather than take them, take my 2 virgin daughters and do whatever you want to them. He knows what they're going to do to them. But this is why I think people suspect that he knows that these are not, that he knows that these are angels. But I'm not sure about that. That's incredible for him to sacrifice his daughter that way. "Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they're going to rape Lot here, right? They say, "Who are you to tell us? Who are you to try to stop us? Who are you to tell us that what we're doing is wrong? You're all puffed up because you've become a judge, because you're rich, because you help the king. We don't have to do anything that you say." So now they turn on him and they tell him what they actually think about him. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break down the door. But the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. So the angels strike the men trying to get in, strike them blind. None of them turn away from their evil. These people have the heart of Cain. When they have something happen to them, they press harder into their evil. And this is the lesson. When you despise the correction from above, you oftentimes turn more strongly into the world and into your sin than you were before. That is how Satan works. If you part yourself from God and you harden your heart, and that's what these men have done. Their hearts are hardened. They won't turn away from their sin now. Now they insist that they have to rape these two men. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So both his daughters are promised in marriage to these two men, and they are part of Lot's household. They are not the men of Sodom. They're probably men who came with Lot out of Ur, or they were born in Lot's household over the 25 or so years that he has been in the land of Canaan. So they don't believe him. They think that he's joking, and they've lived among the Sodomites so long that they've lost touch with the things of God. So they don't go. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But Lot lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. Now, you see how Lot, he's not like Abraham. Abraham still lives in a tent. And Lot is living within the city walls, and he lives in a house. And you see how he's stuck. He and his wife are living the high life in Sodom, and that is making him doubtful about what is right and what is wrong. His wife is a part of this high society. They get invited to the best parties. They are respected. Their children are well educated. People look up to him. They seek his counsel, and he's getting rich, and he does not want to leave. He can't imagine his life now. He doesn't want to wander with his herds and live in a tent any longer. He likes the city life. So they have to force him. They have to grab him and his wife and his two daughters and force him out. They brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." So they tell him, you have to get out of this entire valley. What's in the valley? All of Lot's grazing land is in this valley. This is where his herds that keep him rich are. See, he's not wandering the land from place to place anymore. He chose the land of Sodom because it had good grazing land around it. So you see it now as another reason why he's heartbroken. He doesn't want to leave this valley, and he doesn't want to leave the city. And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." So he knows of a little town, and he decides, he doesn't want to give up city life. He wants to go to this little town instead of running to the hills like the angels told him to do. So they tell him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also. that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. So they had already planned to destroy this city. Right? It's part of this whole community of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're all kind of living the same type of lifestyle. So they tell him, for your sake, we will spare this city. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew out of the ground. So God is so disgusted by what is going on in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the surrounding territory, that he not only overthrows the land, the people, all the animals, but he scorches the earth so that nothing will grow. They've defiled even the vegetation. But here is the tragedy of trying to live in the world and live with God. You can't have both. Lot's been trying to serve two masters. And here he's about to lose everything that he's attained in the world by living in the world. So he's already lost his house. He's lost his position in the city. The city's gone, as a matter of fact. He's lost all his cattle because the Lord rained down fire on the whole valley. So all of his livestock that he's been accumulating for 25 years is gone. And now look. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. She couldn't leave. Now, she may have just looked back out of curiosity, but I think she looked back out of longing. All of her friends, all of her precious possessions, her fine linens, her colorful gowns, her decorations, all gone. And I think that breaks her heart, and she doesn't want to leave. So she looks back upon it. And then she gets to stay there with them. She gets destroyed like the people she longed to be like. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And as he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when the Lord destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So for Abraham's sake, Lot was spared, because Lot was living in wickedness. Now, he wasn't doing things like raping men, but he was living in a city where this was going on, and he was condoning it. He was a judge in the city. And he and his wife were living there like it was nothing. And the reason why Lot thought that was okay was because he went to Egypt, and him and Abraham lived in Egypt like it was okay. So that's the lesson. You can't live in the world. You can't live in the world. And eventually you'll lose everything that you gained in this world. Verse 30. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So Lot doesn't want to live in the city that he begged to go to, probably because he thinks he probably is afraid because he arrived there right before the destruction, and probably the people of the city think that's kind of suspicious. They probably think that's kind of suspicious that Lot's the only one who escapes from Sodom, and so they're probably very upset with him, and they probably are plotting to kill him. So he doesn't want to live among them, or he might be afraid that God's going to come back and rethink it and destroy the city of Zoar as well, because they are the same type of people as who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not sure which, but I think probably the first one is more likely, that they are hostile toward Lot. And he's lost everything, including his wife, so he doesn't want to stay there. He leaves. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. Now look how far he's fallen. He's living in a cave. And it's about to go even worse for him. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. So here it is, another mention of drunkenness. Lot, he's despondent, he's lost his wife, and here he is, he's lost everything. It looks like his whole household perished with Sodom and Gomorrah. All of the people who he even came out of Ur with, all the people that he purchased and brought out of Egypt, everything is gone except for his two daughters, and look what's happened to his family. And verse 37, the firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. We're going to hear about the Moabites more. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So to this day means at the time that this was written, which is around the time of Exodus. So we're going to see those two people, the Moabites and the Ammonites, more. They grow into pretty strong nations in their own right, and they give the people of God some headaches later on down the line. So there's the story. There you have it. The warning for us is Christians trying to live in the world, trying to have God and have the pleasures of the world as well. People who are mixing faith with other, they're diluting the faith of God, saying that they believe in the God of heaven, but then mixing it with things like karma and horoscopes and that type of thing, and turning away in their affliction, turning away from God and going to fortune telling and that type of thing. So when we meet again in the next chapter, chapter 20, we're going to see Abraham fall once again. Right after this destruction, here's God. He personally intervenes again and reminds people that there is only one God by destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're going to see Abraham, who the destruction is so great that he can stand on a hill near his tent and he can see these cities burning. You could probably see it for 50, 60 miles away or more. But Abraham falls into his flesh in the very next chapter. So we see this struggle that continues where our flesh is just continually calling, and we have to keep going to God. So until we meet again, keep heeding the call and keep yourself in the love of Christ. Have a great day, folks.